Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today we're talking with Nicolette DeVidar, who has just started a new show here on Fairfax Public Access called Smart Sustainability. Thank you so much for being here, Nicolette.
Thanks for having me, Catherine.
So your show premiered on January 12th. It's at 6:30 on Sunday, 6:30 p.m. It's a live show.
Yes, it's a live show every week.
And so it's this new programming for Fairfax Public Access. And tell us a little bit about your thought process for creating a show called Smart Sustainability and what those different things mean to you.
That's a very broad question. I got into smart sustainability because the world in general is going through unprecedented accelerated change. And some would say we go through the largest transformation in history, really, which really sort of affects all levels of our life, how we live, how we work, how we exist socially, culturally, religiously, faith-wise, business-wise, financially, etc. So we have a unique opportunity to rewrite really how we do live in communities and in societies. And if you look at certain trends, we have huge demographic changes, which also means value changes. We have a lot of new technologies and digitization, which kind of dissolves the boundaries that are going on. So you no longer have the clear division between sectors and so on. It's all very disruptive. And then you look at the trends of urbanization. In 1950, we had 30% who lived in cities. Today, we already have 55% who live in cities. And then if you actually look ahead, by 2050, a projected 70%, that's 2/3 of the world's population, will live in cities. So when you think about this, our old institutions, our societies, the way we're built, our businesses, how we do business and so on, that is not set up to sustain a lifestyle like this, and also to sustain a different understanding of who we are as humans. As we have more robotics and automation and technologies coming in, we're gaining a completely different understanding of what it means to be human. How do we live? How do we live more equally? How do we live more inclusively? How do we live more sustainably? So smart sustainability brings this kind of all together. We're looking at all the different stakeholders: economy, business, culture, environment is part of it, education, and then of course the people, the workforce, the jobs. It all comes together, and it provides a platform for exchange to really talk about the things that normally in boardrooms and in other conversations you wouldn't talk about because they're the big elephants and nobody wants to address them.
Right, so your format is a panel where you bring people together who have an interest in a particular topic. Let's say it's transportation. Mm-hmm. And unlike a negotiation in a boardroom or in a session where money or resources being decided, you're basically convening and facilitating an open discussion about how each of the people sitting there sees this particular issue.
Yes, that's very correct. And just to give you an example, so in our first show, we had a show about inclusive decision making, multi-generational decision making in boardrooms, and we had millennials there who are new board members. We also had board members there who are more seasoned and tenured board members, but to show the different voices and the different viewpoints, and also some of what some of the issues may be that come up. That's what we talk about. Like, what's the resistance? How can we navigate it? Things you would normally, in a setting like this, not talk about.
Right, and to your point, people bring different perspectives, right?
Yes.
Because we have our own lived experience, we have our own work experience.
Yes.
And we live in different kinds of communities. So in Northern Virginia, we live right next to the city of Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. But we don't have any major cities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at, when you say city, and the fact that a majority of people already live in cities, mm-hmm. when we say cities, we're talking about, there's international cities like New York and Tokyo and London, mm-hmm. and then there's mid-sized cities like Columbus, Ohio, and Richmond, Virginia. And how does sustainability affect these different kinds of cities in a different way? Mm-hmm. Are we just going to end up with either mega metropolitan areas and all of the rural area will be ghost towns? Or will we figure out how to create jobs through infrastructure or broadband that kind of spreads some of the housing and the job opportunities away from developing only these major metropolitan areas.
Yes, and I think these are things we need to talk about when we talk about sustainability. I know for a fact that the smaller cities, they are grappling with talent. How do they get the talent? Because really the good talent, if you look at even the Washington, D.C. area, we have become a technology hub. So a lot of the talent that really goes for those sectors is moving here to D.C. But then you also have a lot of other communities, rural areas, smaller towns, smaller communities that struggle with the fact that they cannot retain the right talent because people don't want to move there. So to think about how can we spread around jobs, that also would include actually Amazon's move here. I mean, I know it was highly welcome, but then, you know, there are probably other places that would have benefited significantly if we had a more holistic approach to thinking about, you know, in the larger picture.
And there's the law of unintended consequences. So getting the HQ2, you look at, well, here's all the benefits on this column. And then you look, but here's all the negative things on this column. One of them is the cost, driving up the cost of housing.
You
know, it's
huge issue.
You know, so overloading, people are like, so many more cars on the road. You know, there's so many impacts that are going to be felt by the people who are already here. So, so great opportunity, but mitigated by, there are downsides.
There are downsides, and we have to really shape a dialogue. If we really, we have a unique opportunity to shape a future for all of the people, because I don't think at any point in history did we have a time where you had an opportunity where people could really bring up their voice to the way we have today. If you want to speak out, you can do that today. When in history did this happen? So you do have a voice, you have to develop it, you have to make use of it, you have to use some critical thinking to really make, you know, to really come up and say, this makes sense for me to go along with or not. But the point is, we can talk about these things nowadays that we probably couldn't talk about before in that same spectrum. So we try with Smart Sustainability to really shape the future of a sustainable society and a sustainable planet, and that has a lot of shareholders, if you want, in terms of stakeholders, and a lot of voices.
True, and we need to think in terms of who's been shut out of this process in the past. So many organizations and so many institutions and government agencies are hierarchical. You know, you have somebody at the head and you have all of these lieutenants and deputies and whatever, and you know, and it trickles down. But big movements like the climate change movement is more collaborative. Gun violence prevention, more collaborative. It's not an organization with somebody. It's people who are all working on different aspects of these issues, coming together as a coalition in a more collaborative way. And I think we haven't had that in the past.
No, we haven't. And technology and digitization makes exactly that possible. This is what agility is all about. This is what agile organizations are all about. You have a different way of functioning and a different way of operating. So in this case, for example, and that's a great example, by the way, Catherine, people join because they're purpose-driven. They all come together. The overriding thread for something like this is the purpose, the mission. Why would you want to join and why do you want to do this? And what it shows is that people, when they have a joined interest, they can make anything happen. Better than if it's like regulated from somebody sort of on the top. And I always think that you can actually see this even on small examples like traffic lights. Have you ever noticed when a traffic light is out and people actually have to collaborate to work who's going to go through the intersection? It works better usually than if you have the cycles that are kind of preset.
Yeah, and that's a social contract, by the way, when the light is out and everybody has to play by the rules and wait their turn.
That's right.
So let's talk a little bit about equity in all of this too. There was a recent court decision that basically revoked the permit of a compressor in Virginia for the pipeline, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And it was in a community of color, a historic community of color called Union Hill, in a rural county, which is Buckingham County. And so the court said that they were revoking the permit because not enough investigation or not enough thought went into investigating the impact on the people who live there. And this was kind of like, this was a big, huge thing because communities of color have always been where they put transformers or garbage dumps, or they mow them down and put a highway in historic communities of color. And by recognizing that we have done this in the past, and to see that this court decision is saying you can't just put a compressor here because you think no one's going to complain or push back. can we expect that equity is also going to be a lens through which we look at sustainability?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, it's inclusive decision-making, inclusive participation, integration. This is a huge part of sustainability. We cannot have a sustainable society until everybody is an equal participant. It's not possible. So we need to look at this and talk about this and really take down the silos and the barriers and just name the things the way they are so we can actually address them and find solutions to it. I think that understanding and awareness are the biggest components. Once you have an awareness that something is happening and you learn about things, next time you see something similar, it kind of comes to your mind, you take note of it more often. That's kind of how you break down those constraints, those barriers, and also start thinking differently about it. And I think that's a key point.
I do too, and I think going forward, since this is a brand new show, one of the things that you're going to be interested in and that our viewers can support you in is finding people to sit on these panels who bring a different perspective.
Absolutely. It is all about a different perspective. So in the 21st century, now going forward, it is no longer about either or. We all have to develop a mentality and a mindset that really goes higher than that. So it's either and or. It's really on the higher level. This is what integration is all about. And this means I accept the other person's viewpoint, I respect the other person's viewpoint. I may not necessarily agree with that, but I understand where you're coming from, and this is how you address it.
Absolutely, and I think as we go forward too, we have to address things like the laws that exist around things like eminent domain. And things that have existed for a century, more than a century, and maybe there's not really a place for them, or maybe we need to approach how the public good somehow needs to be negotiated with people who are private property owners.
Absolutely. I think smart governance, smart industry, all those areas, smart business, smart education, how we live, everything has to be addressed. That's why I'm saying we have a unique chance to really rewrite how we live, work, and exist. And it would be great to have, it's necessary to have everyone come to the table and really be a part of it. If you want to have a voice, now is the time.
And hold that thought. Yep. We are coming back after this break to talk to Nicolette about her new show, Smart Sustainability.
There's more than just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me. There's more than just books at the library.
Il y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
Of great books here today. There's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try.
Only you.
Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about ripped off money. Nothing very nice. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches, don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire!
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and I am talking with Nicolette DeVidar about her new show, Smart Sustainability. Your show premiered on January 12th.
Yep.
It's brand new here on Fairfax Public Access, and people can tune in at 6:30 on Sundays.
Yes.
So part of launching this new show and bringing so many stakeholders together is to also engage with the public. So talk a little bit about what you hope to do as far as getting your viewers to participate in the discussions.
Yes. So every week when we have the show, we really try to get a discussion group that represents different stakeholders that are kind of tied into the topic. So there can be anyone from organizational leaders to community leaders to engaged citizens. So really, if somebody has an interest, for example, on a particular topic, and we are showing the topic which the show is about always ahead of time on our Facebook page, we are always interested in having viewers that would engage or would be even interested in appearing on the show. On top of that, we will engage in a discussion online or facilitate a discussion online on the Facebook page where people can submit questions, they can start discussing topics, they can provide their comments, of course, and hopefully at some point we get to there where we can actually do this parallel while we actually have the show. So you can actually type in your questions, you can engage, you can email, you can really make your questions known right while we're at the show, and we can actually answer them in there while we're there.
And I love that because it's kind of like the wisdom of crowds when you have people not just in the room in front of the microphones having a discussion, but citizens saying, but I have a question, or I have a comment, or I want to make an observation, or here's been my experience. And let's talk a little bit about the things that viewers of Fairfax Public Access might have a question about. I did a show on the equity of public parks and the county and how they decide which parks they're going to redevelop and which ones they are going to leave as green spaces, and how that through an equity lens, the decisions may look as if they're not being made to consider who lives around those parks. Mm-hmm. A very simple sustainability question, but people who live there versus people who would have a stake in how it's going to be redeveloped, all of those people need to have a conversation and understand the other person's point of view.
Yes, that's exactly it.
So what kind of other topics do you hope to address? I'm sure affordable housing, and
yes,
the big ones of transportation.
Yes, affordable housing, and affordable housing is definitely a big one. Urban agriculture, building resilient food networks that provides more accessible and equitable access for everyone within the community is important also. We're talking also about workforce development. We're talking about how do we integrate different parts of the workforce that may be a little bit at a disadvantage at times. So there really is a range of topics, and I would encourage viewers highly to go to the Facebook page because, as we said, we always say like a few days prior to the show of who's going to come on as a guest and what the topic is, and invite them to engage. That would be the best way to find out. So it's a range of topics: career, community, workforce, work-life balance. Also, how do we evolve as humans? That's also a big issue. How do we evolve as humans? What's our understanding? How do we see the world? How do we kind of build the community that we're in with all those aspects? How can we bring a holistic perspective to the way we live our lives?
So I'm assuming too that on your Facebook page, if people had a question or a topic they're interested in seeing you address, they could also leave a comment there.
Yes, they can. So they can definitely leave a comment there. So if there's a specific topic that would come up to mind, and I know there's going to be a range of topics because it's just the world we live. It's almost everything the way we have done before is no longer working. So this is kind of like almost like starting with a clean slate. And for all of us, really sit there and say, okay, this is, how do we go about this? And you can suggest a topic there.
So some of the things when we talk about sustainability that might not leap to people's mind, just going about your daily business, looking at the brick and mortar stores that are going out of business, looking at the office buildings that are emptying out around.
Which are being rebuilt as residences now,
Right, and how that impacts a particular community. We have examples. The studio we're sitting in actually is in the Mosaic District, which is an example of how they took a piece of land that was just sitting here after they tore the old movie theater down, trying to decide what to do with it that would serve, business and restaurants and people, and and how people get to their jobs. The other thing too is more and more people can work remotely.
Yes, they can.
So working remotely might be working from home. People think, well, if you work remotely, you work from home. But WeWork and other, co-working spaces mean you don't have to be isolated in your house.
But you don't have to sit 2 hours in traffic every
Correct.
day either to get to work, when there are other opportunities to engage, to collaborate, to probably get new ideas. I mean, it's always a good thing to get new ideas when you encounter different people, different scenarios, a different perspective. That's how ideas are generated.
You know what's interesting too, that I hope that your show will also address, is the fact that innovation seems to work, at a pace that so outdistances public policy and regulation. Great recent examples of that, Airbnb. They're still grappling with Airbnb and local regulations around licensing and taxing Airbnb. Uber and Lyft, what do we do before ride sharing? I can hardly remember. But again, licensing or oversight, or how do you, the gig economy, and how do we provide benefits for people who work in the gig economy?
Absolutely.
Electric scooters. Now we have electric.
Huge issue. How do you regulate actually the different scooter brands? How do you regulate that not everybody just dumps them on the sidewalk?
On the sidewalk,
Yeah.
but where do they belong? Do they
That's
belong
right.
on the road? Do they belong on the
That's
bike
right.
lane? Or do
That's
they belong
right.
with pedestrians on the sidewalk?
That's right.
So this innovation popped up, and suddenly there's all of these electric scooters, and localities and
Yes.
policy-making bodies are like, but we don't have regulations.
No, we do not.
And so these are some of the things that people in their everyday lives are saying, I'm tired of tripping over electric scooters on my sidewalk, and in industries that people are concerned about, with like for autonomous vehicles, what is that going to do? Not just to people owning cars, but what about long distance truck drivers? So the question we need to be asking are, what are the transportation jobs of the future?
Exactly.
If it's not driving.
Exactly. Where are those jobs going to go? What are some of these aspects of future jobs? What different skills do you need for that? Upskilling is a huge issue. How do we upskill the workforce after, of course, we've identified what kind of new jobs we're going to have?
Right.
Because that's a huge challenge. I mean, the World Economic Forum had estimated that by 2020, which was now, 75 million jobs would be lost to automation, but by the same token, 130 million new jobs would be coming up. Now, the 130 million new jobs, they've not existed before, so there's no title, there's no comparison, there's no way to kind of benchmark the role and see, well, how much are we actually going to pay for that role? There is no way to
With
really
20,
kind of
nobody with
gauge it.
20 years experience.
That's right.
So
So you can't. So those are all hybrid new roles. They're coming up. So there has to be a certain agility and a flexibility, and these things can only be addressed through dialogue and conversation to really get all the different points and aspects. And even then, we might still miss some out, but it's a start.
But the whole idea of a collaboration where it's a flat discussion, there's not somebody here and somebody here. It's like every point of view is valid.
Yes.
So everybody comes in with their viewpoint and it's valid.
Yes.
The thing about upskilling, and having gone to many, many forums through the Aspen Institute, is that you can retrain someone, but unless there are companies there willing to hire them, it doesn't make a difference. There has to be a partnership and a commitment between the people retraining and the people paying to be retrained, and companies saying, well, we are desperate for this employee with this skill set, but you have to, there has to be hiring here. And
Yes.
that's a dialogue we're not talking about. People can talk all day long about community colleges and certificate programs. That's great. And how we help people get reskilled. We can do that. There are programs. But then how do we work in partnership with companies that say, I need that skill set? Okay, but how are you in a position to hire these people and reward these institutions for having created these programs for your benefit?
Yeah, and I think that discussion actually even has to go further, because I think one of the biggest issues why the discrepancy is that a lot of hiring managers in organizations have really a hard time to understand what are those new skill sets and what do they look like in roles. One of the biggest issues is that even in current roles, we do not have a clear understanding of what a specific role really entails. And so unless we have a better understanding and start asking the right questions, what is really relevant for the role, not the 20 pages, like, bullet job descriptions. I used to keep saying, like, Jesus has already a job. You kind of have to narrow it down.
And that's what blows my mind about, if you look at job openings,
Oh.
Have you ever looked at a job opening? Who would ever apply? You've asked for so many things, and
It's
you
not
pay,
possible.
and you pay practically nothing. That's what I. And then
Yeah.
when you look at the salary, it's like, you've got to be kidding me.
isn't-
Who would apply for this?
And the point is, even for the hiring manager, I guarantee you, if you have like a 3 or 4 or 5 page job description, they don't know what's in there. You cannot go and hire for these things. That's why it's really important. What are the 3 key skills you're looking for? Do you understand the skills? What is the purpose of the role? Can you really match them? And I think part of those certificate programs that are coming out, that's really something we need to talk about, because it's not just the matching, it's also an understanding of what the actual issues are, of why there's a discrepancy. And these are the things you need to talk about. But of course, nobody wants to talk about this because it kind of, puts sometimes it can be uncomfortable to talk about these, as I could call it, the big elephants in the room. And that's exactly it.
Exactly. And we need to talk too about the fact that without upskilled and reskilled workers who have jobs at the ready that pay a living wage.
Yes, absolutely.
So, and this impacts things like, how do you get your workforce back and forth? And where do
Yes.
they live? Do they live 2 hours away because they can't
Yes.
afford to live within 30 minutes of their job?
Yes.
All of these things tremendously impact the health and well-being of communities.
They absolutely, they do. And that, for example, is a trend I know we're going to talk about because there are already companies and organizations that actually go further out to see, well, where's our talent and how can we live out there so we can spare them the commute of 1 or 1.5 or 2 hours going to work.
True, and not turn every city into San Francisco.
No, that's exactly it.
San Francisco is just, it is writ large, everything that could possibly go wrong when you have a couple of major employers willing to provide private bus transportation to their locations, and how it has just driven everybody out of a city like San Francisco except very wealthy people.
That's right. And that's not equitable. And these are the things really for a smart city particularly, whether it's a mega city or a smaller city, it doesn't matter. You do need affordable housing. And you do need to make it livable. Why else would you go there? It has to be livable.
And I want to say I am 100% behind this new show, Nicolette. I'm looking forward to seeing how you assemble your panels. I'm hoping our viewers here on Your Need to Know will go to your Facebook page, make suggestions, offer to introduce you to people, offer topics, and we'll tune in and we'll watch and we'll submit their questions and actually engage with you.
Yes, thank you so much. That's exactly it. Because if you're an empowered citizen, there's responsibility. You've got to engage.
And that's what it means to live in a democracy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, our viewers at home, is what you need to know.